I love what you said earlier about leadership, spiritual leadership. And I know that that's something you're involved with, and starting, helping to found a new organization about, let me see what it is called, the Association for Spiritual Integrity. I really like that. And I want to say too that before going on to the call, I did a little more research, and I looked at a number of websites, and some of them were actually ranking spiritual teachers. And I thought, I'm just going to have a peek here. And I looked, and there would be man, 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 woman, man, 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 woman. So even in this day and age, and I'm curious in your experience, because I've seen you quite a bit and been around with you a lot, and you lead well. It's very direct and very, like you say, authentic, really supporting the authentic expression of each person. So I'm going to say, why do you think that is still in this day and age, that the voice of the men are still being highlighted, their teaching and their journey? And correct me if I'm wrong, in my observation, often it's not very embodied, as I see with so many female teachers.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a curious thing. Is there something, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah. I think, the decision for me not to become mother, that was very much linked to this point that you're speaking about, because we didn't have ways to become a spiritual leader and to parent at the same time. Whereas so many spiritual teachers, even ones that I learned from on my own journey, they had walked away from small children. Somehow culturally it's okay for men to do that. But for women to do it, oh my, there's a strong judgment on that.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting, when I was living in India for a few years, and I spent chunks of time in silence in a meditation there. And I remember one conversation where in a cafe one evening, I met these women randomly, and this conversation came up. I never met them again. I can't even remember who they were, but it's like we were all women who were a product of our time, believing that we had to make a choice between mother or spiritual leadership. And two of the women had walked away from their small children. And the pain of them, of what they held for doing that, on top of the collective punishment and shunning because of that they did that. But men do it all the time.
Yes.
It's not to say that it's right. It's just that the cultural ethos puts a huge pressure on us to make a choice. And so we're emerging into a time of where we need to model being parent and being leader. Now, because so many of us, and because of the absence of contraception till like recently, of course, it was men who became the priests, the rabbis, the leaders. It was men. They could go and do that. And the women stayed at home and supported them, and very often wrote the sermons and organized their business and were the backbone of their spiritual communities. Very often women were. And so we typically have taken on that role. The time is changing. And I want the generation to come after me not to have to make this decision like I had to make, and like my colleagues, my peers had to make. And what does it look like when you do both? And so we're looking at thousands and thousands of years of where there are no models of women who are mothers and spiritual leaders. They're not out there, not really, not in the effective place out there. They're not there. Women who don't have children who are out there, there's a few. However, their voice is not taken to be the serious authority, because so much of our psyche has been conditioned that spirituality, God was a man, Jesus was a man, it was the Son of God. this, many religions have various messiahs and teachers.
Mm.
The pagan ones had a lot of the feminine, but a lot of the more contemporary ones of the last couple of thousand years were male archetypal models.
Mm-hmm.
And so our psyche isn't able to see that was cultural and it was of its time.
Yes.
It was of its
Mm-hmm.
I spoke at a conference recently where there were 40 teachers and a small proportion of women. And somebody wrote into the organizers this strong, articulate letter saying, your upcoming conference, these teachers are awake, these should not be teachers at all. And it was completely divided by gender.
Mm. Huh.
Yeah, completely divided by gender, that the ones who should not be there were female. There was no other criteria mentioned, It was just, let's just divide it in. And that's not unusual. That's in the unconscious of our culture.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And
yeah, it's really, I can just give a very good example just while we're on this, because we could fill this out in so many different directions. But just to say that in my own life, so not even that long ago, say 25 years ago, I was, in a relationship with the father of my children, and he was given that choice because we were part of a spiritual organization, ashram, living there. And then I became pregnant. He was given the choice that he could become a renunciate and renounce everything.
wow.
So I could take the children. And
go.
that is how it turned out. But, even that's only 25 years ago. So this was Ramana Maharshi ashram, not saying that is at all Ramana Maharshi's teaching at all. It was run by men, and this was what was passed to them. It's just in the collective. It's in the, the dominant culture stream that this is what you do. There isn't another option. That's and right. I can see the pain in that also on the side of the men, also, and not to mention the children. And what I want to get to with you now, my a very wonderful support in my life has been Adyashanti. It's been a very good friend of mine for a long time, and Mukti, his wife, obviously, the two of them, because we live in the same neighborhood. And they've been my friends for a very long time. But what I love about both of them is it's very heart embodied. And at the time, I was in the midst of a pretty dark night when I met them with being a single mom. And that I could bring that forward into that environment and feel really held and supported in that. And what I want to say about that is I find that in this spiritual leadership, the evolution of it that is happening, there has to be a way also for the men to really evolve and become embodied. Because in that sense right there, if I can articulate it well enough, is this particular male body teacher played an important role for me because of growing up in a unhealthy, male-dominant spiritual culture for decades, up until that point, influenced in a very strong way by a rigid Catholic thing in my family and my family's history, that men were abusive. They were not to be trusted by the women. Lots happened, and it still does, as we know, sexually, not only with girls, with boys, with everybody. Lots happens in the Catholic Church, all getting found out. And so for me, having a male teacher for a period of time was a segue into trusting something in myself, that structure of just structure, actually, safety, that the masculine can offer. So the feminine can offer this nourishment and this softness and this wise, delicate holding, but the masculine can hold your hand, can kind of have your back. I mean, both can, balance and unfold in a beautiful way together, not unique to any body, but to all bodies. And so I think like that is critically important. And what I notice is that male teachers that are more heart-centered and embodied also don't get invited often. That happens too. So I just wanted to fill that out because I think that female leaders and teachers play an even more important role because mother is missing. The mother in the spiritual arena, she has been missing. And, that ability to meet your fears, to have your feelings, to be vulnerable, to go into those places that are unknown and we feel that sense of vulnerability. That's something that a woman can access. So,
yes.
yes.
And men are as yet not supported to go there, not by the general community. It's not really ripe yet in our cultural settings to allow men to be vulnerable. The pressure for them to be a provider, for them to be the strong one. They're forced into particular types of behavior, so they oversell themselves for fear of being a loser. And women undersell themselves, because we're not used to having any position of leadership,
Yes.
And you mentioned the ASI there, the Association for Spiritual Integrity. It's very much something that I've been carrying, I've been pregnant with since I was 15. I didn't know what it looked like, what it would look like until 40 years later. If I heard that at the time, I would have thrown the towel in, I think. I remember being in religion class, which is what we had in our high school equivalent, and a lay teacher talking to us. I remember specifically the day that I went, there's something wrong here. And one of my friends said, "But miss, what's sex like? What's it like?" And she said, "I don't know, I'm a virgin." And I went, something off about that. I'm really glad that she was honest, but why is she teaching us about sex and she doesn't know what it is? There's something wrong here. Most of us were sexually active. Like, it's like, okay, there's somebody really curious, and then there's friends of mine, and myself who want to know more about contraception. And she hasn't even gone there. And so something in me, that's one of the reasons I studied religion, was like, can I change the system from within? Can I be a realistic religion teacher? Can I bring contemporary values to young people? And that was a motivating force, which of course then went underground for many years and rose up again, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when it's like, there's something off. Because in my own, solitude and disconnecting, life brought me back in again. And I got married again in 2013. And so it was like, I'm being brought back into life and I'm engaging with it in an entirely different way now, entirely different way. And where does my spiritual work, or what I have discovered to be, something authentic within me, how can I connect that with the outside world? Where does that fit into contemporary values? And here we are. Women have no voice. Women who have children, there isn't even a model there. It's male patriarchy, and you're going to be a free-for-all dartboard if you're a woman. So be prepared to get punched, because that's what happens to us. So how do we deal with this? What do we do here? And so one of the core reasons that I started the ASI is like, there's a mismatch between our inner wisdom and how we show up in the world. There's a mismatch. We don't know how to do it. So the ASI is kind of protecting ourselves from our own ignorance. So it's like, let's find out what is good practice. Let's find out what integrity is. Let's find out what assertiveness is and how to have clear boundaries. how to have friends that have no idea of what our work is, how to have students who are not our friends, and how do we balance that around our own needs for friendship and don't mix it with our students.
Mm-hmm.
All of this area is a mess, and
Yes.
it has given rise to bad practice for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
I'm giving broad brush strokes over a whole culture of thousands of years, but I'm trying to shake the whole thing, you
Yeah.
know, in one swoop. Let's shake the whole thing and see what falls out, what's ripe, what's ready for change. You
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, this is really good. I mean, it reminds me, this spiritual rebel kind of thing, like your
Yeah,
book, the spiritual, how to be a spiritual rebel.
yeah,
And it sounds like you're bringing that energy pretty much into everything, just questioning, questioning, questioning. And what
yeah.
are we, what are we willing to uncover, to
Yes,
just keep uncovering and come out of denial about what all of us carry, but specifically in the ordinary realm of life, so much wisdom, just like showing up for your life, just as it is. Like I think on your website it says, come as you are, just come as you are. And what an invitation. Because otherwise, if we carry this dominant culture,
yes,
non-dual
yes,
history with us, there's all of these like hoops you feel like you have to hop through
yeah,
first and show up and have this, what ends up happening is a spiritual identity that is
yes,
dysfunctional,
yes. There's
highly.
no honesty in that.
Yeah, there's no what honesty.
No
Mm-hmm.
honesty in it, you know, and that's a bit stinky, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
But the political correctness is still has still a high value. Spiritual political correctness, you know,
Yes, yes. Yeah.
and that needs to be seen through to be a hiding place that's not appropriate and denies our humanness.
Mm-hmm.
And can we find a way of embracing our humanness? And because of our female bodies being the way we are, and how it functions, we 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 have to pay attention to it. We have to,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yes.
know.
Yeah, because the
And
body has its cycles.
it does, and we have to be attuned to that. You know, something can't ignore that and respond to it, because it does impact on how we feel and our moods and how we perform, and even our dexterity changes at certain times of the month. There's so many different impacts, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And
Yes.
then when you hit the menopause, society sees you, wants to let you become a bit more invisible, because
Mm-hmm.
culturally our subconscious says, well, you're actually not procreating anymore. Men are immune from this. You're not procreating anymore, therefore your value is reduced. And this is unconsciously in all of our psyches. And so we allow postmenopausal women to become more invisible, and they're the ones with the wisdom, they're the sages, they're the wise ones, and we don't have a platform to give them the microphone
Yes.
to learn from
Yeah,
them.
and would you say that just in general, I find women tend to be a little more quiet, almost like there's this inner sense of knowing, and it doesn't have to tell everybody what it knows.
Mm.
It just lives
Yes,
it.
yes,
It's like in the day-to-day living. And when
that's
you
right.
were when you were saying this about humanity, like welcoming more of our humanness, so trauma is the the space is opening up more to acknowledge that everybody carries trauma. I mean, it has been for some years. I remember, like in the beginning when I was teaching 20 years ago, I had training in trauma because I have children who were seriously traumatized through birth. So I did a lot of study and work, and that would naturally carry over into my satsang. And so my satsangs were often quite emotional, quite vulnerable, sensitive, open. And there would be some people that would leave and say, "This is not non-duality,"
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I'd be okay. You're not ready for what I have to offer here. It's like okay. It's like take if it aligns and there's benefit, great, and if not, that's fine too. But what I wanted
Yes.
to say along those lines is I remember listening to somebody who's very big in the field and offering incredibly good work, Gabor Mate. I may be saying his name
Yes.
wrong,
Yeah.
Gabor Mate. And he's written many books, and he's speaking all over the place, and he works very much from a psychological perspective, and he's worked with plant medicine and addicts, and been a doctor forever, and is very open about his own addictions and his own healing and recovery and so on and so forth. But I remember I was at a talk with him in Adi Shanti, and he almost fell off his chair when he found out that Adi Shanti's teacher, main teacher, was a woman, a parent, a mother with 5 children. And he just like could not believe it. And I thought, well, that is part of what influences, Adi Shanti to be the kind of teacher that he is also, is a little more inclusive. But just like it was just an example, and I'm not saying anything about this particular person because he offers wonderful things, because that was the unconscious psychic speaking,
Yes.
like, oh no, couldn't be a woman to have influence on you and have you be such a, look at this crowd here that is coming to you and resonating with what you're offering. Like, how could that be? So it's deep in the unconscious to unravel this. So how do you think it's all going to happen?
By encouraging young women to model something different.
Mm. Yeah.
And that decision that I made and many of my age made, I don't think it needs to be made. I don't think it's a compulsory step for spiritual leaders anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. And the more that, it's like our new VP in the vice president in the US.
Yes.
Woman is a woman.
Yes.
And yeah. And so it's through doing that. It's through seeing something different.
Mm-hmm.
That it, it bleeds then into our psyche of, oh, that's possible. Of course that's possible. Mm-hmm. And let it become the norm. Mm-hmm. It will become the norm in a few years that women in leadership is as legitimate as any gender in leadership.